initially, I think the whole vision for them was quote unquote a marching band, something to support the football endeavors on campus, and what you're talking about on Saturdays, yeah. But in my experience, I found out that if you're gonna have a band program, and that's what I was more interested in, is having a complete program, which would include all sorts of performing ensembles, which means your concert band, your jazz band, a pep band for basketball, so forth and so on. So I was trying to put together a complete program that would also include the marching band endeavor, which was basically set up to do, the football thing. When I first came to DC, if you don't mind, I want to rewind and tell you something about my first time that I came to Washington, which was in 1953. Because I came to Washington, D.C. to attend Howard University. Okay. I came from an area in North Carolina, for example, we had bands everywhere. And of course, that's a tradition in the South, as you well know. I mean, everybody had bands. All the universities, all the high schools, the elementary schools, everybody had a band, right? When I came here, there were no band programs in Washington, D.C. Zero, okay? And even when I went to Howard, the band that we had was, marginal at best, if you understand what I'm saying. Because they too didn't really concentrate on marching bands and stuff back in the 50s at Howard. So, having said that, even though I studied music education at Howard, and mine was instrumental music, it was more geared toward orchestral music than it was toward band music. So, the models really that we studied mostly were the models from the Midwest and the South than it was from around the DMV, the Washington, D.C. area. And I think the only close university that had a band of any consequence around here was Morgan State. They had a band, but for the most part, you didn't see bands around Washington, if you understand what I'm saying. The military people, I think, had a band, because they would use that band to march into their ceremonies and so forth in D.C. So, the question that you asked me about models, the models that I used in my head were the models that I grew up with, if you understand what I'm saying, because we had bands everywhere. I was in a band in the South when I was 7 years old, okay, in our elementary band. I graduated from that to our junior band and from that to our senior band. So I've been in bands all my life. So that was sort of the models that I grew up on. So I had a good idea of what bands should be because I had a lot of experience of being in bands myself. And we had a jazz band where I grew up at, so I had jazz band experience. So all those experiences, I think, helped me to mold my idea of what should happen at Bowie State. So having said that, those were my models more than, say, Cardozo was, because like I told you, Cardozo didn't have a band when I came here. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, though. When they put this band together and they called it the Cardozo Band, that band, I don't know if you know the history or not, is the one that went to the Rose Bowl, okay? But that band was a combination of students that were drawn from a lot of schools, not just from Cardozo. It just so happened that Cardozo took credit for it, and when they put all the money together and the students together, they bought uniforms and everything that represented Cardozo High School.
Actually, some Howard University students
That's right.
were actually in that band.
That's right. So that was really sort of the germ that planted the seed for the development of band programs in Washington. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, the next band that I remember that was developed, because I went away to the military and came back to Washington in the late 60s. At that time, Mr. Ford had come in to the picture, and he was at Anacostia. And he had a band program there before he actually moved to McKinley Tech. So that band, if I remember correctly, back in the 60s, was probably one of the first real band programs that I saw in Washington. Now, let me back up just a little bit, though, because over at Kelly Miller Junior High School, there was Bobby Felder. Bobby Felder was a bands person. You know, I don't know if you knew Bobby Felder was, but he graduated from Florida A&M. So he had a rich tradition of bands. I mean, because Florida A&M have had bands for years. I mean, I can remember even as a kid, I used to watch that Marching 100, if you understand what I'm saying. So there were all kinds of things that I can remember that as a child growing up that could answer that question about models that you asked me about. Because we had them in the South. We had A&T, you know, you had Florida A&M, you had Virginia State, you had all these Southern people who had all these band programs, and we used to see them as kids because we'd go to, sometimes we would go to these band festivals, and then sometimes we would go to these football games where they would invite different high schools, so they'd have these band shows for pregame as well as postgame. So we would see these bands, so it was sort of in my mind in terms of how bands should operate based on these kind of models. But in terms of the DMV, back to what you asked me earlier, I don't think that I really got any models in and around Washington, D.C. that would contribute. I wasn't completely immune, if you want to use that term, from the nuances of quote-unquote the North. Because even those people who moved from my hometown that came north, because you know that migration was almost due north anyway, all the way across the country, they would bring back some of those ways that people had up here, you know, which was sort of funny to me because to me I don't think that they really understood how rich the Southern tradition was. We grew up in environments in the South that was very nurturing. When I came to Washington, I sort of got the feeling that people were very protective of themselves. They didn't trust anybody because the neighborhoods that they lived in, if you lived in Trinidad, for example, you didn't dare to go into another neighborhood because all of a sudden you got these people fighting and all kinds of stuff going on. So it was a whole different atmosphere up here when you start talking in terms of neighborhoods. I grew up in a town where it wasn't but one neighborhood. You understand what I'm saying? It was black. And so we all sort of grew up like one big happy family.